We've got ones that can see. Welcome, everybody, to today's show. While most people have been distracted by the tariffs and the stock market and some of the other nonsense that the mainstream media shoves down everyone's throats to keep them distracted, the majority of people are not paying attention to the global carbon tax that the United Nations just passed. Of course, this comes from the International Maritime Organization, a group of unelected individuals who are a tentacle of the United Nations that have decided to pass this carbon tax on shipping. And this is the beginning of the normalization of a global carbon tax, something they have been talking about going back to the propaganda they would put out in the 60s and 70s about global cooling and global warming. Well, they've gotten to a point now where they've dumbed down society so much so that they're going to move forward with this. And people, obviously, after what occurred in 2020 and 2021, should be looking at these people and calling on mass arrests, whether it's a citizen's arrest or not. These people who were responsible for killing so many people a couple of years ago, who talked so many people into doing something they shouldn't have done, took no responsibility for it, cost people their jobs, cost people their lives, and cost a lot of people their sanity, continue to operate on a massive scale without any repercussions. And now they're moving forward with what really Agenda 2030 is all about, and that is the carbon tax. This doesn't just tax you financially, it taxes you based on your behavior. And that's what they care about most. Dictating where you go, what you could do, what you can buy, how you can live, how much electricity you can use. That's what this is about. And this entire thing, which is framed as a climate initiative, would funnel billions of dollars to the United Nations. And who would be fronting the bill? Well, all of us will be fronting the bill. It's really a backdoor tax that nobody's going to be paying attention to because they don't even understand what climate change or the carbon tax is in the first place. This is a global wealth transfer. And I'm going to play for you this clip so you can see how smug and arrogant these people are, if you want to even call them people. Here is Arsenio Dominguez, who is the Secretary General of the IMO. And I want you to keep in mind, he says, I'm going to say trying because nobody is going to bring us down. These are people who are going to dictate the price of goods, who are going to pretty much funnel money out of the middle class back into the pockets of these global elites, if you want to call them that, into the United Nations and other organizations like this, without these people ever being elected in the first place. He openly says with a smug look in his face that no one is going to bring us down, despite what these people have done over the last couple of years, despite the fact that they've openly done simulations telling you that they are going to ruin your life, that they are going to do a simulation of how we're going to lock you inside for a couple of years, doing simulations on what the food shortage crisis is going to look like, because that's what's going to come of this carbon tax. You might not think it yet, because you might say, well, we grow most of our food here in America. Well, when they start telling you that most of your food is made from imports from other countries, kind of like they did with Ukraine. Remember all of a sudden that whole thing with Ukraine happened and prices went up? And everyone said, why are we paying more money just because there's something going on in Ukraine? Oh, well, we don't grow wheat in America anymore, right? We get our majority of wheat from Ukraine. And people are going, huh? We don't grow wheat anymore? They are going to use this as a way to tax us, not these shipping companies, not these big corporations, us. And this is how they funnel money out of the middle class and put it back in their pockets. Listen to this clown talk about how no one is going to stop us.
Major world's largest shipping nations decided on Friday to impose a minimum tax of $100 for every ton of carbon dioxide emitted by ships if their planet-hitting emissions are not already accounted for.
Is the right result, is a good result for the organization. Takes us to one step closer to finalizing the first global mandatory measures when it comes to decarbonization, including a pricing mechanism. And that's what I reiterate my optimism.
The fee will be charged if nations have not contributed enough to the International Maritime Organization's Net Zero Fund and the ships are not emitting their compliance targets.
These agreements, we're the first one that get on that agreement on a price mechanism on emissions at the international global stage. And I just want to keep calling that rather than just looking and finding ways to trying, and I'm going to say trying because no one is going to bring us down, IMO into how short we fall, it's good that every now and then it's recognized how actually we good are at achieving what sometimes people think that is impossible for us.
One major issue during the meetings was the way a tax will be charged. More than 60 countries entered the negotiations pushing for a simple tax charge per metric ton of emissions.
And it's amazing that they can sit there and say, look, we're doing what's in the best interest of humanity, right? They never address global cooling versus global warming. They don't address geoengineering, how they can make it rain in Dubai. But other countries have droughts, right? How about we address that? Ooh, we're having droughts in third world countries. We're having droughts in America. But you can make it rain in Dubai by cloud seeding because it's actually real, right? Well, we don't want to stop the droughts. Why would we want to do that when our plan is to starve you to death? Because remember, just like their hero Henry Kissinger, they call him a war criminal. He's just a flat-out satanic criminal in general. Don't forget what he once said. Who controls the food supply controls the people. Who controls the energy can control whole continents. Who controls money can control the world. Well, that's all three happening at once because this will give them more control over the food supply chain. It'll give them more control over energy as far as how much energy you're allowed to use and consume. And of course, who controls the money? Because we're going to see a massive transfer of wealth. And when we talk about simulations like Event 201, some of you may not have seen this one, but they actually did a food chain reaction simulation in 2015 where they talked about just this type of thing happening. Civil unrest, people who are angry with rising food costs, right? Population growth, disease, how will we respond? They ran a simulation. Here's just a little trailer that they played for the simulation. Of course, this isn't a simulation. This is them carrying out their plans in real time. These simulations, of course, are just test runs. That's what they are. Just like they ran a test run on the 11th day of September conveniently. Just like they ran a test run during the marathon at Boston conveniently, right? Just like they ran a test run during Event 201. Look.
Around the globe, food prices have risen about 40% in the last year.
The severe drought in the Horn of Africa has reached famine conditions.
Violence breaks out in Somalia as demonstrators protesting rising food prices clash with police.
We are facing a humanitarian problem.
So they're agreeing to a global carbon price for shipping while everybody's distracted by all the nonsense they continue to distract everybody with. Let me give you a quick little rundown on what this is. The agreement would make shipping pay for its GHG emissions based on direct compliance, GHG fuel intensity, and base target GFI thresholds. Of course, most people won't understand what that even means. GHG is their way of saying greenhouse gases, also knowing that you won't understand what they're saying, so they could just say it and you could go, I don't know what that means. Okay. Carbon pricing would be linked to GFI of ship fuels used annually on a well-to-wake basis. If adopted, starting 2028, all ships of 5,000 GT and above would be required to either start using a less carbon-intensive fuels mix or pay the excess as determined by the GFI thresholds. And GFI means global financial impact. Now remember, don't forget about that word equality, right? Because they need to bankrupt countries specifically. They need to bankrupt America and bring America down to its knees. So when they talk about equality in these things, and then they start bringing up global financial impacts, well, they're going to want to distribute that, right? Distribute equally. Tax Americans more than third world countries. Tax us the most, in fact, so that we could kill off the middle class and we could bring in our universal basic income. How convenient. A ship continuing to use conventional marine fuel, for instance, would have to pay $380 fee on its most intensive emissions and $100 per ton on remaining emissions above the lower direct compliance threshold. Fees would be collected into an IMO net zero fund, with funding used to reward ships using zero or near zero technologies and fuels and support climate protection efforts among the least developed countries and small island developing states. Estimates project the carbon pricing system could generate $10 billion annually. So they're going to be making money off of this. That's pretty much what they're saying. They're going to reward ships financially, in a sense, right? They're going to reward ships who decide to go to net zero, who don't run their ships as often because it'll be difficult for them to get from point A to point B without using fossil fuels. But they'll reward those ships for shorting the food supply chain and other supply chains that we actually are dependent on, right? And let me read to you, as they're preparing people for a global carbon tax, of course, just like they did in 2020, they will shame you into compliance because most of these people care about their social status, right? They're narcissists. The majority of people are, let's be real. And to them, it means, well, if the news tells me to be a good person, I'm going to post it on my social media, even though when I'm not on social media, I'm a complete scumbag. But for social media, I'll take pictures of myself wearing a mask. I'm going to take pictures of myself because this is what's coming next. You thought it was bad with these people taking pictures of themselves, giving themselves shots and wearing masks out there and then shaming you, saying it's not so hard to wear a mask, even though nobody could breathe wearing one of these things on their faces. Well, next up will be their carbon emissions and how they start saying, look what I'm doing for the environment. Instead of eating a steak, I'm eating plant-based meat. Instead of eating chicken, I'm eating Z-bugs, right? That's what's coming. But here's just a little article in regards to everything going on from Yale. Brought to you by Skull and Bones, of course, and this guy and his university are talking about us getting ready for it, right? So would companies offset the cost of the tax by passing it on to consumers? Yes, that's what many people often forget. Any tax is shared between demand and supply. That is called the incidence of the tax. Who actually shoulders the burden of it? So it's not as though you enact a carbon tax and we're going to just make the fossil fuel companies pay. The burden will be split between producers and consumers. And we could guarantee that the producers won't put any money into it. They won't put any tax on it. This is just to tax us so they can bring about universal basic income, your smart city setup. All of this comes with a carbon tax. It is imperative that people pay attention to it and how this works. And again, it sounds like this boring thing because carbon, the environment, right? You see these commercials where they just show, the green and the green and the green, and nobody pays attention. They don't realize that this is going to screw us all immensely. And that's what the plan has always been. So they say, how would the tax work? Each country's government would set a tax per ton of CO2 or some other greenhouse gas equivalent, and then it would be up to the individual countries to levy the taxes. There would have to be some sort of international coordination to make sure that countries are actually doing their part and assessing the tax equally across different places. Many people often don't think about how, if there's a global carbon tax, countries keep their own tax revenue. In principle, countries can use the revenues however they want. One way that some of the revenue could be used is for higher income countries to provide climate finance to fund mitigation and adaptation in lower income countries, right? And of course, these people just go, well, that sounds great. We should help everybody out. We should distribute the wealth until you're broke, until everybody's broke, until everybody's living in poverty. That's the point. This isn't like we're going, oh, well, there's a third world country. I'd love to give this person food over there. Well, of course we all would. Nobody wants somebody in a third world country to starve. But the reality of the matter is the people in the third world country want to be left alone just as much as we want to be left alone. They don't want America's help. They don't want Bill Gates showing up there saying, I've got the cure, because they know exactly what it means because they're smarter than most Americans. And the only reason some of these third world countries where they show you these images of everybody kind of wearing like underwear, walking around, people go, oh boy, you know, they're so poor over there. The only reason that they would have any trouble farming would be because of geoengineering, because of droughts that are being caused by these same people who are implementing a carbon tax. That's the only reason. Those people don't want to live the way that we live. But of course, they convince people, oh, you know, everyone's so rich here. Oh, yeah. If everyone's so rich here in America and everybody's so poor in these third world countries, these people who don't want to live the lifestyle that most Americans live, where they live way above their means, well, why doesn't Bill Gates and all these guys who have billions and billions, you could solve the food crisis pretty quickly, right? But of course, you could really solve the food crisis by just stopping geoengineering or making it rain, right? Since they have the ability to do that. So they say, what are the benefits of a global carbon tax? A carbon tax gets the incentives right. If there is a global carbon tax, every time somebody purchases fossil fuels or carbon-intensive goods or services, they now have to pay extra for the environmental damages. Not only does the tax discourage polluting activities, it also provides incentives for research, investment, and deployment of more efficient and low-emission alternatives. It's one of the most effective ways to reduce emissions, right? Reduce the emission of the boogeyman. That's what's most incredible about it, that people actually believe this. The propaganda they put out, they show a tank, you know, outside of a factory, and they're like, carbon emissions, the climate, right? Well, what are trees supposed to do, right? What do you think the natural law is of all this stuff of how, well, there's carbon emission? Because the real carbon emission they're trying to prevent is you and me. And what they plan on doing is turning everything green so that they can have control of everything. And then eventually they're going to say it's not enough. There's still this insane weather occurring. People go, well, yeah, there is some insane weather occurring out there. And I'm going to go, wow, I guess we need to really alter our behavior. We might get hit with a tornado instead of realizing your government's modifying the weather. And then they're going to go, well, if you just stay inside more and you follow your carbon emission, we won't kill you with weaponized weather any longer, right? Because the real carbon that they're trying to stop is you, because, you know, you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon. You know, I mean, it's not hard to figure this stuff out, ladies and gentlemen. So they go on to say, what are the biggest challenges to enacting a global carbon tax? Public support is the biggest obstacle. There seems to be a fundamental ideology against taxes. Well, no crap, right? Because you pay your taxes and then you drive up the road and you're driving through 55 potholes and you say, what am I paying my state taxes for? They don't even pave the roads. Isn't this what they're supposed to do? Right? You go, what does the money go towards? Well, now they're finally telling you, because they're planning on abolishing the infrastructure and bringing in a universal basic income. So now they're telling you, oh, your money's going to Sesame Street in Iraq. Right? It's going to lap dances over in Ireland and LGBTQ, operas. And of course, everyone's going, I'm not paying my taxes anymore. Well, don't worry about it, because the whole system's about to change, and it's going to be based on a carbon tax. So this says also in many countries, simply administering a tax is not as easy as it sounds. There's a big debate about what to do with the revenue. There are a lot of different options. You could rebate the tax back to the people. That's not happening, which is what Alaska does with its royalty tax on fossil fuels. You could spend it on clean energy programs and other climate investments. You could spend it on other public projects or even reduce other taxes. As mentioned previously, you can use it to help fund climate-related projects in other countries. How you spend it can affect the degree of public support. So they want to tax you. Then they don't want to tell you what the money's going to go towards, just hoping that the shipping companies, the ones who are shipping all the food or, the appliances across the ocean, that they suddenly don't use fossil fuel. So maybe they won't be able to get from point A to point B anymore because it won't be feasible anymore, right? Then you'll start saying, why am I paying more for goods? Why am I going broke? Where's my tax money go? Oh, your tax money, it's for your state to figure out. So you want to tax people, and then you don't even want to tell them where the tax money's going. Well, we know where it's going. It's lining the pockets of the United Nations members, the Council on Foreign Relations, all of them. That's where the money is going. So This is going to lead to higher prices across the board. And even, back in, I forget what year it was, 2016, 2015, FEMA contractors were talking about social unrest, which would be caused by 395% food price spikes, right? Well, they're not just telling you this stuff because they had a dream in the middle of the night, because this stuff is scripted out, that they're going to make price spikes so high that people aren't going to be aren't going to be able to buy food anymore. They're not going to be able to buy anything anymore. And at the same time, when you say, I'm going to farm myself, I don't need them. Well, guess what? You're going to get ridiculous droughts. You're going to get poisoned crops because of the crap they're dumping from the sky, which they've been doing and continue to do. But it's amazing they don't address this. Why didn't Donald Trump actually address this, right? He's for the people. Shouldn't he come out and address this and say, hey, you know what? This carbon tax thing is a scam. Well, I've heard him say that. But how about he actually addresses geoengineering? Bring up how they could make it rain in Dubai so there should never be a drought anywhere on Earth ever again. And those are things your tax money should go towards. Well, you can make it rain. Well, I think one of our top priorities then for the government, since they work for us, is to make sure there aren't droughts so we don't have a loss of food, because we need food to survive. But instead, they just talk about your money going to the LGBT and going here and then lighting it on fire for the most part, instead of just basic common sense, right? You'd say, well, food and water are the most important thing now. So if you can make it rain, you should probably make it rain just make sure there's no droughts. Make sure the crops grow, make sure the lakes are filled, Right. But instead, when they do make it rain, you get acid rain. You get a lot of barium and aluminum for bale that's sitting in your garden outside, and you're wondering why your crops don't grow, right? So they're moving forward with the carbon tax. Nobody's saying boo about it because most people don't understand what it is. It sounds like a boring topic. Well, this is Agenda 2030 in a nutshell, and it's coming to you from the United Nations, who's telling you, hey, we don't care that we weren't voted in. We're going forward with this, and you're going to pay, and you're going to pay dearly. Unbelievable how these people, after 2020 and 2021, that these people still can go and they can meet and they could conspire against the people is incredible. But that's the point, is that occurred and there wasn't a revolution. There weren't people who were arresting these people for crimes against humanity, for genocide. Nothing happened to them. And they know that. So they said, all right, we might as well go forward with the carbon tax. Now everybody's fighting online. Everybody's just, looking at the opposite political party, arguing. So we could just continue to make stuff up. They'll believe it. We continue to take their rights away and they'll accept it. And the next thing you know, everybody's living in a smart city or living with universal basic income. It's incredible. I thank everybody for being here. Hope you're all doing well. God bless you and your families as always.